Alright, it's time for video number 4 in the series of videos about crankcase ventilation, and this hopefully will be the last one. This one's going to be about putting oil down into the combustion chamber through your ventilations by venting into your air filters and knock. So this is pretty much common knowledge. It's just the way it works. But anyway, I'm going to read from the Samba right here. And I'm going to prevent you from seeing it, so I'm going to attempt a little bit to protect the guilty. But let me read. Oil mist vapors can cause detonation and carbon buildup, as well as funk in the intake tract. Not a good idea. So, like I said, primary topic today is going to be mist and vapors can cause detonation. Okay, we'll investigate that, whether that's going to happen or not. But there's a couple other smaller topics, one of which is the carbon buildup as well as funk in the intake tract. So why don't I address the carbon buildup and funk in the intake tract right now? Alright, to answer the first question, it's like, okay, we're dumping oily stuff down in here. And suppose you pulled it all apart and you wanted to clean it up. You'd want to have some kind of a solvent to clean all the crud off, right? Well, you know what? It seems to me that we're already dumping a solvent down in there. And the solvent is called gasoline. So you're like, well, gasoline doesn't dissolve oil. And I'm like, wait a minute. If I go to Google, which is where I am right now, it's Google right there, and I use their AI, they've got an AI solver in here now. So anyway, the AI solver says the following. Yes, gasoline is a solvent for motor oil. Gasoline is a hydrocarbon-based fuel, and motor oil is also a hydrocarbon-based lubricant. The like dissolves like principle applies here, meaning that hydrocarbons dissolve each other. While this property allows gasoline to be used as a degreaser and cleaner, it also means that gasoline can thin out and degrade motor oil, potentially leading to engine damage. You don't want this leaking down into there because it degrades your oil. So, we all know about this one. You don't want this thing leaking down in there. But anyway, that takes care of the first one. But it gets even better than that. Somebody's going, well, that's not enough. That's not good enough. That's not going to keep it clean. Yeah, okay, well, how about this as a thought? Maybe somebody else has thought that that's not quite enough. So it seems to me that maybe somebody put some extra degreasers potentially into the gasoline. And then maybe once you get these degreasers into the gasoline, maybe they're called detergents. So maybe there's something out there called a detergent gasoline. So, alright, so we head back into Google once again, and here's what we get. Yes, gasoline is sold in the United States typically contains detergents. These detergents are added to help prevent the buildup of deposits on fuel injectors. Well, for us that would be carburetors and carburetor bodies and whatnot like that, including our butterfly valves. Okay, intake valves and other engine components like manifolds, ports, obviously the intake valves, and your combustion chamber. Wow! Who would have thought? The U.S. Environmental Protection Agency requires a minimum level of detergent in gasoline to ensure engine cleanliness and efficiency. So, Mr. Mechanic is trying to scare you into doing what he wants you to do. He's scaring you. He's turning it into religion. Don't religions kind of use scare tactics to get you to do what they want? Alright, the next small piece that I did spend some time, investigating was the fact that there is a no pressure drop as the air goes through the air filter. So here's where that kind of stuff comes from. I don't know why anyone runs hoses to air filters. I'm back to the Samba again. On dual carb engines. Sorry, I have no justification according to this guy. There is so little vacuum in that hose, in my case it's a pipe, next to if not zero. There's no pressure in that pipe coming from this air filter. So in other words, there's no resistance to airflow inside the air filter according to this dumbass. And yeah, he's a dumbass. I think this guy is one of the biggest crackpots that's in here. And yet people will like listen to what he says. Oh, he said this and he said that. This is not Allstrip. Oh no, I'm gonna throw you Allstrip in here in just a second. So the AI says, yes, there is a pressure drop across an automobile air filter. The filter itself acts as a resistance to airflow, and as it becomes clogged with dirt and debris, the resistance, and thus the pressure drop, increases. Wow, that makes sense, doesn't it? Not to that other guy, but to the AI, to me, hopefully to you it does. This increased pressure drop means more energy is needed to push air through the filter, potentially affecting engine performance. Yeah, it puts an additional draw against the piston, potentially. Typically it doesn't impact mileage, it'll impact peak power. But anyway, so that guy's spewing one thing, and something with some actual intelligence, artificial intelligence, has told us the exact opposite. Alrighty, so when the air goes through the filter, there's a pressure drop. So inside this box, there's a pressure drop associated with the resistance according to the air filter. But it gets even better. So this guy who's telling you that there's no resistance and there's no pressure drop and there's not any kind of a vacuum being applied right down here has missed out on something else. So let's take a look at this. All right, the air has to go through this area. Now this area is like, I don't know what is that. That's like a 3.5 inch filter by like 7 inches across. Anyway, it's a rather large area. So that volume passes through this area, then all that volume has to pass through that hole right there. Now, what does that tell you about the velocity of the air just inside the filter versus the velocity of the air as it goes down this hole? Well, over here it's slow, and over here it's fast. And then what does the ideal gas law tell us about pressure as velocity goes up? You know, PV equal nRT. So pressure and velocity, temperature. Now we've done nothing to alter the temperature. So if the velocity goes up, what happened to the pressure? As if, you know, the air moves from the filter to the hole. Well, the pressure goes down. And then where is the hole? That hole right there, where does that sit relative to this? Well, it sits directly on top of it. So you've also got the old ideal gas law, velocity, pressure drop that's associated with just air moving through here. So it's not just the filter, you also get ideal gas law pressure drop. Alright, and to close this air filter thing out, imagine that I've got one of those little filters that sits right here. You guys know what they're about. I'll put a picture in here real quick. So the exact opposite thing is happening right there with that filter. The air comes out, has to slow down. That's going to build pressure inside here. Then it hits the air filter, which also builds pressure back down in here. Now, I said I would give you Allstrip's thoughts on it. Let's see what Allstrip has to say. Alrighty, Allstrip. Now, if you've watched my other videos, you know I griped about Allstrip, but it was basically he had said something along the lines of how things don't work this way in real life. And it's like, yes, there are reasons why people are called mechanics, and there are people called engineers. So, he's not an engineer, but this is one thing that he did get right. If you design and size your system right, there will be almost no oil coming to the filters. He is, wow, he is correct. So, that's what he's saying, and he tells you that on street engines, you should be doing this. So, he is, he's done experimentation. He doesn't understand the physics, but he's done enough experimentation to know that this is not going to be puking a bunch of oil in there. And I think now it's time to actually dive in to the experiment. Alrighty, so the oil consumption experiment, I should be able to pull this, and I should be pretty close. I've been trying to top it up and get it to the right spot. I've got my paperwork here. Let me see what's happening, see how close I am. Alright, it's right about there. Let's wipe it down and make sure it stays about right there. Yeah, I don't know. It's it might be a tiny bit above the mark, but not by much. We'll go with the consumption that I had. So let's take a look at the bottles that I used to go from where I was to the fill up. Alright, let's see. I put a little mark on this one because this one was brand new and I wasn't sure I was going to use the whole thing, but I ended up taking all of this and putting this entire quart in there. And I had a partial quart left over, and I put a mark on it right there. So I did that one down to there, plus an entire quart, and I think it's a little tiny bit above where it's supposed to be, but it's not going to really matter that much. So we've got our consumption right there, and we have the miles that it took to do it right here. And now we get to go do the computation. And I've got my logbook in here, and I've taken the data and put it into a nice little spreadsheet so that I can know, what I did when. Here's my mile readings. Here's how much gas I put into the car. Here's an intermediate mile per gallon thing just for the heck of it. But what I needed was a total running summation of how much fuel the car used and a running summation of how many miles I drove. And this is an overall beginning to end mile per gallon thing, not relevant to this video, but I thought I'd do it anyway. And if I look at my sheet right here, I apparently started this little test, it looks like May 22nd last year, 2024, and I just finished it May 17th. So almost 1 year's worth of driving. So there's my year's worth of driving, and we need to run some totals down here. So if I take the miles, which happens to be 4863, and we divide that by the amount of oil that I used, which appears to be 1.43 quarts, I used the quart about every 3,400 miles. That's a nice round number. It's not, super low. It's not super high. It's not, like, let's face it, when I go to the Samba, sometimes you read people who have, they'll tell you, oh, I never use any oil, and they're bullshitting. So you will have oil consumption. That's reasonable for an engine that's got 10,000 miles, and I'm not a professional engine builder. This is well within the ballpark, I would think, of what you could do. So we need to now take a look at the number of quarts of gasoline. Well, I used, it looks like 179 total gallons of gasoline in a year. That turns into that many quarts. We already did the oil quarts. We need to take an average of what the gasoline was and what the oil is. I almost always put 87. I did do a trip last year where we went higher in altitude and the octane dropped. I put some 87, some 85 in there, but whatever. We're just going to use 87s. And in a prior video, matter of fact, the original video that I started with this process, I used minus 100. I still stand by that. That's an okay number. So anyway, in order to arrive at just a simple average, I need the quarts and the octanes. And the quarts and the octanes, you multiply them like that. You're going to add these guys up, and then you're going to divide them by the total number of quarts used, which equals that right there. So I use those four values, 1, 2, 3, 4, in that particular formula. And that gives me an octane of 86.63. So I had a grand total whopping, which you can see right here, of 0.37 in my octane drop. Whoop-de-freaking-do. Now, let me throw a little soundbite in right here from the original video. It's going to pull oil in there past your rings. Okay, so in that original video, I told you that no matter what you do, you're going to consume oil past the rings. So, what is the amount of stuff that you remove past the rings? Well, see, I've got some numbers right here for them, 0.25, 0.25, and 50. What do these things actually mean? Well, that's easy. You come over here and we do some research. So, we find a paper. This one right here is pretty solid. And again, this is something you don't go to a Volkswagen mechanic for stuff like this. And let's take a look at the authors here real quick. John B. Haywood, this is a guy at MIT. I featured him on a prior video. So he is a multiple appearance researcher. And what we need to do with this particular paper is go no further than just this little summary piece right here. But they feature 3 different ways that the oil can be consumed. Let's take a look at them. Alright, the 3 ways are listed in that paragraph right there, or that piece of a sentence. Contributions of oil entrained in the blow-by, so I'm going to refer to that as blow-by, oil evaporation, and oil flow past the piston and valve guides. That's called oil flow. So we've got blow-by gas entrainment, we've got oil evaporation, and we've got oil flow past the piston and valve guides. Now, this doesn't list anything about leaking, and I my engine doesn't leak a terrible amount, but I know that a drop or two came off. Let's just assume that my engine never leaks. So we've got a paper. I'm going to go back over to my stuff. I've given us blow-by, I've given us some evaporation, and I've given us flow. Now we go, okay, how much goes where? And I don't know, when I did the original video, I just figured, let's just take a guess and call it 50-50. So, you know, you're going to be sucking oil past your rings. You're going to be having some blow-by. You're going to be having some evaporation. So I have us now, right now, at 50% past the rings, and the rest of it's going to be blow-by. And where does your evaporation go? Well, basically into your blow-by. So those two kind of go to the same place. And it gives you a certain amount of octane loss for each of those. You end up with a percentage loss due to these things. Negligible, total percentage loss, negligible, and final octane readings as you reduce the octane for each particular piece, getting us to, as I said, 86.63. Yay. But let's go back and look at the paper real quick, because those percentages, fractions right here are incorrect for most of the driving that you do. So if you come down here and you look at it, at low load, oil flowing into the combustion chamber was found to be the major consumption source, 90%. Low load. Now this is going to be basically putting around town, driving on the highway, not going up mountain passes or anything. That's going to take some heavy throttle, but just cruising along, not just killing your engine. 90% of it goes past your rings. That means only 10% comes from the other place, which means these numbers that I've given us are incorrect. So blow-by. Now if it's at 90%, that means I'm going to just split this thing halfway and halfway. That's going to be 0.05 to that one, 0.05 to this one, and 90% to flow. And what does that then get us? Well, basically it's telling you that you've lost absolutely no octane by rebreathing what's coming out of your crankcase most of the time. Now the paper also says the following when you're on heavy load: 40 to 50% oil transport, oil evaporation 30 to 40%, which means blow-by is still, you know, oil entrained in the blow-by is still pretty low percentage. But let's do that, 40 to 50%, let's just call that 45% oil transport. That means this one right here needs to go about 45%. That gets us to about 55% here. And like I say, it doesn't really matter. Let's go 0.55. And the evaporation goes to 0. And 45 to the flow. And what do we got? 0.2% for the blow-by and whatnot. And 0.2% for oil getting past your rings. And this, again, that's under heavy load. So, doesn't matter. You're going to suck oil past your rings no matter what. At heavy load, it's roughly 50-50, and at light load, it drops, and it's pretty much nothing but oil getting past your rings. So, Mr. Mechanic, who's telling you that you're going to knock if you rebreathe, is full of shit. Stop listening to those people. Anyway, I got a little tiny bit more to do with this, but I want to go down to the car because there are other things that Mr. Mechanic is going to tell you that are associated with this, and I want to look at them real quick before finalizing this video. Alright, let me throw a few final thoughts into this video. Alright, there are going to be a lot of people over there at the Samba who tell you that, they're going to tell you that you're making a big mess when you vent into your air filters like this. You're going to get all kinds of oil all over your filters. You're going to get oil down here in the base. There's two kinds of people that tell you that. The first kind of the person is the person that vents the valve covers. Now, they don't seem to understand that that valve cover over there, this one right here at the fuel pump, do not do the exact same thing that this one and that one do. So since they haven't realized that that one pukes oil, this one pukes oil, that one doesn't, and this one doesn't, they never took the time to realize that, they just assume that they all puke oil, and as a result of that you get this. And the other type of person who's telling you that you're going to get all kinds of mess is a person who is like working on a V8, or a person who's working on a V6, or an inline 4, or an inline 6, and they've made some extrapolation to a flat 4 from this other type of engine, which is completely irrelevant. So the first person is missing part of the picture. The second person is drawing I don't know, a freaking Renoir or something like that. He's not even like in the friggin' gallery where he should be. Okay, you've got other people, you might say, oh, but it's going to make it run bad. It's going to make it cough and sputter and stuff like that. I haven't found too many of those over at the Sam, but the one guy that I did find who was telling you that had a really nice picture. He's got a really pretty engine. All kinds of stainless steel braided hoses running this way and that. But again, he's a box guy, and from the box he went to the carburetors, which is nice. But the problem is when you do it with stainless steel hose, it's hose, and it did this. You know, it gets warm and it warps. So he developed drain traps, and they of course are going to fill up with liquids, and as they fill up with liquids, eventually they start going pit, 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 which is exactly what you're going to get, and he ended up causing him problems. And I don't recall what he did, but I'm like just looking at the picture going, you have problems because you've got drain traps. You know, it's that drain trap issue that kills all these rubber hoses. So again, it's rigid, it's never going to develop a drain trap. So that's what this thing does. I just don't get it. You know, it all comes down to exit velocity. If I have a big hole right here, the velocity is low, the pressures are low. If you've used the factory system the way you're supposed to, that plate's installed properly. This thing is spinning in here the way it's supposed to. The oil disappears. Bring it up. Even more stuff disappears when you run it through this box. By the time you get up here, there's nothing left. Or next to nothing. And I mean, that's what this video was all about, was to show you and convince you that this does not puke oil. You're not going to get a mess there. You're not going to make your engine knock. You don't have to worry about stuff puking down on your driveway or your garage because you're running some a ventilation thing down here. What do they call those? Road draft tubes. They're not even a draft tube because the draft didn't have a nipple on the end of it. The ones they stuck on a Volkswagen had a nipple. It's not a draft at that point. It's just a drain. So much misinformation. And you know, when you go over there, because the mechanics don't understand how anything works, they have an inability to come to a consensus. If you understand how the system works, you can arrive at a consensus. This is the consensus, and there are plenty of people over there. Like I say, there's Eric Allred, the drag racer guy, who arrived at big hole right here in kind of a backwards ass way, but he's not the only drag racer who will tell you big hole right here, and the problems go away. But lots of road driving people, such as myself, are in there. They're just a minority. Here and there, if you read through the things carefully, don't skip over things, you'll find people, this is what I do. I vent from there, I go to my carburetors, I have no problems. I can disconnect it. I don't notice any changes in the motor when I disconnect this thing. And this is the same thing with me. I mean, I was just driving around a couple of days ago without this thing attached, you know, when I was working on the engine. I cannot tell when this thing is on or off. This has that little impact on how the engine runs. Like I say, you know, I like to get good mileage, and I know what's coming out of here contains unburned hydrocarbons. To some extent, I can then burn them and push my car down the road, and you know, who knows, maybe I get a 2/10 of a mile per gallon more. Don't really know. Yeah, we've got to close this one out. I think this is the 4th video in the series. You know, if you haven't watched the other ones, go back and find them. Watch them through. And yeah, if you got some thoughts, if I missed something, great, put it down there in the comments. But this lesson is now over. Perhaps we can hear the bell. And there's our bell. See you next time. Get on out of my garage. Go do something. Enjoy your cars. Lesson over. Class dismissed.